Good morning. How are you all doing today? One of the we heard about some of the impediments of historic preservation being a barrier to housing, affordable housing. Also, building codes are often included in that as a barrier. Predominantly with the conversion from, say, an office to a residential, automatically sprinklers are required. Sprinklers are a big ticket item, and so is there a way that is there a tool in the toolbox that we can use to sort of maybe overcome that barrier? And what I'll be presenting here is some thoughts about that. So just for your edification, here's where I started in my quest for historic preservation. This is the funerary chapel of Highgate Cemetery in London. It was one of the 7 Victorian cemeteries that were built in the mid-1800s. I went there for a semester-long experience in historic preservation, led by Matt's predecessor, one Doug Rinn. And we had about 20 students. We were given 7 buildings to look at, so I spent the first day going to each of these buildings throughout the greater London area. Coming down Swains Lane, it was late afternoon in January. It was dark, dusk was just coming in, the fog was rolling in, and I came upon this thing and I said, wow, this is fabulous, this little Gothic, neo-Gothic entity here. And I said, this is my project. I put together a plan that I've been there several times since then, and they actually incorporated some of my scheme into their adaptive reuse. It's currently alive and well and doing well. You know, I feel that probably a past life is buried in that cemetery, and that's what attracted me. And it was also my goth period, so it all worked together. So that's historic preservation. Building codes happen here. City Hall, 25-year career as a code official with the City of Milwaukee, of course. Heavily involved with adaptive reuse of many of the existing buildings throughout the city, and have become afflicted over time. So what I'll try to do here in the time I have is to give you a brief history of the genesis of the IEBC in Wisconsin, an overview of code requirements for housing and the performance compliance method applied to those conversions to housing, and present some of the results of a study I did a few years back dealing with the performance compliance method on historic buildings in Wisconsin. Starting out, I mean, we adopted in Wisconsin the International Building Code in 2002. It had one chapter devoted to existing buildings, which was woefully inadequate. And it did have a version of the performance compliance method in it, but it was not very well understood and not very well used. Later, the first International Existing Building Code, published in 2003, finally adopted the 2006 version in Wisconsin in 2008. Improved some building safety and provided some greater level of flexibility in the adaptive reuse of existing buildings, not just historic. That IEBC had 3 compliance methods that we could choose from. One was a prescriptive compliance method. It was just sort of told you, here's what you need to do. The work area compliance method had different levels involved. And then the subject of this presentation is a performance compliance method, which I think is the tool that needs to be better understood and at least be aware of. So you as developers, building owners, even architects, here's a tool that is going to benefit us in the preservation of historic buildings. It came from NFPA 101A many years ago. A former plan reviewer code official with the state of Wisconsin by the name of Jim Smith was heavily involved with health care facilities. So he was aware of NFPA 101A. He later projected this, or adopted it, for what was then the ILR Chapter 70, which was a code chapter dedicated to historic buildings. That was published in 1989, and it provided a building evaluation method of 17 safety parameters. Later, the model legacy codes, BOCA and UBC, adopted their version of the same element with 18 parameters. Basically, a performance compliance method is going to allow for flexibility that promotes adaptive reuse of existing buildings, basing it on a numerical objective evaluation. So it provides some flexibility, and it's likely, and like I said, it's the least understood and least used of the 3 compliance methods of the IEBC. This is another, sort of these experiences that I've had that kind of set the stage for this. This was a grain exchange in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was an office building converted to residential. And this happened in 2002. So we had just adopted the International Building Code in Wisconsin, so everybody was hypersensitive to the rules and regulations of that era. But it was done with no sprinkler system. How did that happen? Well, the state, in their infinite wisdom, has still had this historic buildings. COM 70 was still in play at that time, and it used a grading system, an evaluation form here, where you ended up adding points. You compared the building to the current building code for new construction, and you saw the difference, and you took negative points or positive points. If you added it all up and it came out to 0 or better, your building was deemed appropriately safe. This is today's form. There's 23 different elements of safety parameters that are evolving, that are used. Well, anyway, getting back to the grain exchange building. So here was the rules for sprinklers. It said, hey, does it need a sprinkler? Yes. But you're not putting one in, you're going to take -5 points for it, right? But you're going to add points in other areas to get it right. Well, as I said, the state adopted this performance compliance method for the historic buildings, but they never did anything from 1989 until 2000. They never changed it. They never updated it. The model codes did, and in the most recent version of the International Existing Building Code, using the performance compliance method, it said, hey, if you're taking a high-rise and you're converting it to residential, it has to be sprinkler. You can't take negative points. So what ended up happening is they said, what happened? Well, we were using the state code that was in effect at the time of the redevelopment, and everything was fine. But fast forward to 2003 edition of the IEBC. That spawned a statewide change of use and alterations code committee. We evaluated it. We took a look at the IEBC, and that's when the IEBC was finally adopted for the state of Wisconsin. So again, many existing buildings are not going to meet today's current code requirements. That's a foregone conclusion. They're potentially salvageable, but sometimes the costs are just not going to pencil for us. It's also necessary to regulate some life safety issues in existing buildings. And it provides the opportunity to ensure new construction is in accordance with today's code requirements. But the performance compliance method basically allows for a controlled departure from full compliance with code requirements for new construction, yet they, without compromising the minimum standards for the fire protection, life safety features of that rehabilitated building. So this is basically the scope. What I'm trying to show here, alterations, repairs, and changes of occupancy are covered by this particular scope. The chapters 5 and 13 that are mentioned there basically are the work area methodology, and it is the other compliance method. So you can use one or the other, but you can't use all three of them together. Applicability, just here, these groups A, B, E, those are occupancy groups. R is a residential group, and that's what our focus is today for residential housing and that sort of thing. So where do we go from there? Here's a key element that if I use this performance compliance method, the code is going to say the code official must accept it. So that gives us some tooth there. What are the main areas of concern? Fire safety, means of egress, getting out in an emergency situation. And then there's a category called just general safety. And each of these are evaluated, as we'll see in the coming slides. This section is the key to understanding the entire evaluation process. It clearly states that every one of the 23 parameters need to be evaluated, and nothing can be omitted. So that's sort of a key element here. We just need to understand you have to go through the whole process. And the process starts with the building height and area. Basically what this is saying is, hey, if I have a building that could be built new today with this type of construction, I can be X number of stories. So let's say I could be 5 stories, but my existing building is only 3. So I get some positive points for that. And then of course this is the formula that's used for both number of stories and height. I know they said there'd be no math, but there's math. Then the other element is building area. So again, if I had a building that was allowed to be built new at 5,000 square feet per floor, but I have a small 2,000 square foot per floor building, I'm going to get some positive points. And I put that into that evaluation form that you saw earlier. And here again, the math. It's not high-level calculus by any stretch of the imagination, but and there's actually a contingent here that put this together in a Excel spreadsheet where you just put in the numbers and it automatically does everything for you. So it's getting there. Of course, you could always go to ChatGPT, right? Tell them, hey, work this out for me. Yeah, compartmentalization. So if I can break this building down into smaller chunks, and I can say that the fire is going, a fire in one area is not going to spread through the entire building by compartmentalizing this building, I can get some additional points depending on the size of that compartment. So from 15,000 square feet, I'm getting 0, but as I go smaller and create unit size square footage, 2,500 is a pretty big piece of real estate. So in a small Main Street building, you can probably work with that 2,500 and pick up, let's see, for our occupancy would be on the bottom, potentially 22 points. It's quite an add-on. Tenant and dwelling unit, same thing. If I have some more than the code requires, and it gives me all sorts of categories. If I have no fire partitions, incomplete fire partitions, or no doors, I may be taking negative points. But if I can put in fire barriers that exceed the code requirement, I'm going to get positive points. So again, here is sort of the feedback you're going to get from that for our occupancy, up to 4 points, depending on how you handle it. Again, one of the things that's critical is the sprinkler system. For Main Street historic buildings, oftentimes the water supply is not even there. and just the cost of all that piping and the work involved with putting a full sprinkler system in, and that, you know, even if you convert a hotel to a apartment and you're going to by code require a sprinkler system, this might be a strategy to avoid that additional cost. So again, there are other things that are less expensive. Similarly, corridor walls, we explore those. And if I can put in a corridor wall that's better than what the code requires for new construction, I'm going to pick up some additional points. And why am I wanting points? Because when I leave the sprinkler out, as we saw, you get a negative set. What else do we deal with? Vertical openings. So anytime you have a vertical opening going from one floor to another, that's a chimney. That's where smoke, fire spread. If you can control those or limit them, you're going to be able to pick up a few points here and there. This is based on your class construction. It's a multiplier, so it's a little bit, and then here's where your negative points are going to come in if you have floors connected. That atrium that Matt talked about at the Bostrom building, you know, that was sort of that would have garnered a couple negative points, but possibly could have been picked up some positive points in some of the previous categories. HVAC systems, again, if I have a furnace in the basement and I'm running duct up to the 6th floor, for instance, I've got another chimney where smoke is going to have a way to get from one floor to another, spread the fire. And of course, we all know that most people who die in fires die from smoke, not from the fire. So we try to control that. If, however, you have a HVAC system that's just on one floor, no ducts penetrating, you're going to be in much better shape, and you get 5 additional points. And detection, automatic smoke detectors, even interconnected smoke detectors are relatively inexpensive, so you'll be able to put them in this case. If you can put smoke detectors category E at the bottom there, installed throughout the floor area, I'm going to be able to pick up a few points in 6 points in that scenario. So those are so that's an easy one. A fire alarm system, putting in a fire alarm system is going to be a lot cheaper than putting in a sprinkler system, perhaps. So this is another option. Put something in, make it more than the code requires. As you'll see in one case, putting in a fire command center, which is a room dedicated to firefighters, is going to provide you with a significant point add-on. So potentially 5 points there. And smoke control. Again, if I can provide smoke control with my pressurized stairs or something like that, we're going to, again, pick up some additional points. And then there's 6 categories, and here's the table that tells us what kind of points we're going to be able to pick up for an R occupancy, the 3rd row down, potentially 4 points. And then means of egress, not a big help for residential because they do require you to provide the required means of egress. And that's just getting out of the building. Oops. And so as you can see, for our occupancy, the bottom row, you're either going to take negative points because you don't have good egress, or it's going to be neutral. So no help for residential. Other things that they look at are dead-end corridors. That's sort of where you're in a corridor and it takes you a while. And what they're concerned about is they don't want people exiting and going down that pathway and then taking the additional time to say, oh, I can't get there from here, and now I have to change my direction and rethink my egress. What else do we have? And this is the dead ends. You have different categories. If If I have no dead ends, good for me. If my dead end's too long, I'm going to take negative points. So I'm just trying to give you a kind of a flavor for what this performance compliance method is on about. Also, for smaller buildings, if my exit distance is significantly lower than what the code would allow, I'm going to be able to use this formula and come up with some additional points to offset the deficits that I might have from other issues. Elevator control, this one needs work. Right now, if I have no elevator, I'm automatically getting some negative points, whether I need an elevator or not. But in Wisconsin, if you have 3 units and you're putting it on the 2nd floor, you need to have vertical access to it. So you're going to put the elevator in anyway. But it's not going to give you a whole lot of extra points by having it. And that's the only points you get is if you put the full phase 1 emergency operation into that elevator, which is cha-ching to the 10th power. But it is an option. It may be, again, it may be one of those things where you're working out the numbers and saying, okay, if I put this in, it's going to cost me this. But if I put in a sprinkler system, it's going to cost me this and then some. And so then elevator controls, potential points there. Means of egress, emergency lighting. That's usually, battery backup and that sort of thing. Relatively inexpensive add-on, but providing it has potential to overcome some of the point deficits you might have in the existing building. And so here we go with 2 or more exits. Potentially, I could pick up 4 points. And mixed occupancies, that means if I have a retail store on the 1st floor, and I have residential on floor 2, 3, 4, that's going to be a mixed use. I have to evaluate the building for each of those uses. But, if I have the separation requirements, or if I exceed code requirements, I may get some additional points, or I may end up taking a negative 10 points. So it all depends on what you have. And automatic sprinklers, that's the big bugaboo that we've been talking about here. Again, if you don't want to take on that cost, you're going to take some negative points. But if you use some of those other strategies or other categories that we worked with or looked at before, suddenly we're going to find ourselves able to offset that. And of course, this is just the high-rise requirement that we don't get to take negative points for not having a sprinkler. We just have to sprinkler the high-rise residential. And that makes sense. We're talking about 75 feet above the lowest level of fire department access, so it makes some sense. But here it is. Do I have sprinklers required but not provided? Negative. If I have sprinklers that, depending on what's required, well, it's not an issue. But here's where we're going to take a potential negative 6 points. So we've already seen that we could get 10 points for this or 5 points for that. So we're already offsetting the negative points that we had there. Standpipes, similar situation. Of course, they're not hard to do, but oftentimes they're not required for low-rise buildings typically. So this may or may not be applicable, but it is in there to address. If you don't have it and you need it, you're going to take negative points. If it's not necessary by code for new construction, you're fine. And incidental uses like laundry rooms and furnace rooms, boilers, that sort of thing, that's what we're talking about. We have to evaluate those and find out if we've got the separation from that, if we've contained those high hazard areas adequately, we're in good shape. again, depending on how we do it. So if you need some extra points, you may want to put some additional money into getting a 2-hour rated enclosure around that furnace room. And as I said, the last 4 segments, it's 20, 21A, B, and C. Those apply to institutional uses, hospitals, but the state of Wisconsin doesn't allow you to use this performance compliance method on the hospital anyway, so it really becomes a moot point. So again, what you're going to end up with is whatever fire safety score, egress score, or general safety score, you put in those numbers there, add them all up, and they come up with the bottom total score. Then there is a mandatory safety score depending on your occupancy. So here for our occupancies, third from the bottom, you have to get at least 21 points in the fire safety category, 38 in both the means of egress and the general safety category. And so then you just sort of plug in the numbers and bada bing. So your numbers here, the mandatory score there. If this number here, this result, is less than or equal to 0, the building is deemed compliant with the code. And life safety issues have been adequately addressed. Now, this led me to do a study a couple years ago. I did my, well, Matt called it a mid-career. It was a late career master's program that I pursued. This is my thesis. And it was called IEBC on Main Street. And what I did was I actually took 8 buildings throughout Wisconsin and applied all 3 of the compliance methods. So prescriptive, work area method, and then performance compliance method. And I found that and all of those buildings were being converted from something other than residential to residential. So the sprinkler requirement would have kicked in under any of those circumstances. So how do we get that to work? Well, this image is from Mike Jackson's upstairs downtown, showing that there's a lot of buildings in small town Wisconsin that are empty on the upstairs. Housing crisis? Why not? Carl Elefante, former AIA president, said the greenest building is the one that's built. So from a sustainability point, we've got some options here. But this is sad because we've got businesses. You know, I used to go to a dentist that was upstairs from a Rexall drugstore on 27th and Hour, I think it was, in Milwaukee. But anyway, so this is what my premise was. I said, how can we encourage folks to take these vacant upstairs units and convert them to residences? So let's just take a quick look at some of those. So here in Racine, Wisconsin, a little 2-story building, 1878 vintage. But here's hopefully giving you the answers you were looking for. This is the evaluation. I took points for my building height in the area. I took points for other things that I chose to do. And on the remark side are those extra things that I did to offset the negative that I took for my automatic sprinkler system. So the net result was, here's my total score, here's my mandatory scores. The net difference was positive. So this was the existing retail on the first floor. I got 4 units on the upper floor, and but was able to do that without sprinklering the building. Here's one in Monroe, Wisconsin, the Treats block. And here again, just sort of taking the numeric evaluation, coming up with, 15, 11, a pretty safe building. You know, it got a lot of points. Didn't have to do a whole lot, but some work was done other than sprinkling the building. And retail existing on the first floor and 4 units on the upper floor with the appropriate means of egress. Chippewa Falls, the music block. Again, a really small postage stamp of a building, which gave me a lot of points up on building area. And again, but when it all came down to it, this only was passed by half a point. But it's greater than 0, right? So it's all good. And again, a little existing retail on the first floor. 3 units only on the upper floor, limited space, but 3 units more. There's 3 units more than we had before. Grant's building in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. What a wonderful building. It's been sitting vacant for years and years. Here, because of the size, it's actually very deep. It didn't look very wide, but it's very, very deep. And so there wasn't a whole lot of points in the area. But what I ended up doing was I had to put in a fire command center, which just gave the fire department a little extra space. As you see, the FCC there gave them a space to work with and communicate. So I got some points for that and was able to offset the lack of sprinklers. And second floor, this is a very long building, so it probably had about 7 to 8 units potentially in there. And in a very vibrant area of Milwaukee, which would be really, really helpful there. Lake Mills. This was an interesting one because it had 3 stories, but as you can see, the second story is hemmed in by the buildings adjacent to it, so natural light was a little difficult. I went through the process of doing the math and a couple of things that needed to be done there, and it passed. But it was the future retail on the lower level and 3 units on the upper level, but they're 2-story units. So the natural light for this back unit was provided because the buildings only went so far back, so that worked out. But the 2 units, the front and the middle unit, had no light on the second floor. So using sort of a mezzanine process, we were able to put some windows in on that side. And in Mayville, Wisconsin, the Rute department store, again, a 1891 building, but running the numbers, taking care of adding some elements that were over and above the code to get some of those positive points again to offset the deficit of not having a sprinkler system. And so first floor and the second floor, another four units that would be provided there. And then the Kleinheinz Dairy in Wausau, little small building, kind of a 2-story front piece, but the back is just a single story. Here again, here's the numbers. Came out okay with a minimal amount of work. The first floor, this here was the 2-story space that we saw in the front elevation. This was a single story. And was able to put 6 units. So we have 9 units total. The front units are 2 stories, or using a mezzanine to keep it at, basically by rule, a single-story building. And finally, I think we're at Sturgeon Bay, 3rd Avenue Historic District. Here again, running the numbers, deciding what I'm going to be willing to do to offset the sprinkler point deficit that I had to take. And again, existing retail, first floor, and 4 units on the second floor. So, I mean, this is the Reader's Digest condensed version of handling this thing. I tell you what, if I could probably do an 8-hour course on letting you know exactly all the nuts and bolts of it, but it was enough, and I was only given 30 minutes time, right? So, but I do offer consultation services. I've been involved with this for many, many years, and I thank you for participating in the presentation.